In the frozen wilderness of northern Canada, a mystery unfolded that still baffles people today. It wasn't a ghost story or a legend passed down through generations, but a real event that left behind an empty village, abandoned meals, and questions no one could fully answer. This is the chilling tale of Angikuni Lake, where an entire Inuit settlement seemed to vanish without a trace. It was November 1930. A trapper named Joe LaBelle, familiar with the land and its people, arrived at the small village near Angikuni Lake in the Kivalliq region of what is now Nunavut. He had visited before and expected the usual warm welcome from the local Inuit community. But this time, something was wrong. The village was silent. Campfires had burned out. Food was still cooking. Dogs were found dead from starvation, tied to posts. Everyone was gone. No signs of struggle. No footprints leading away. No warning. This wasn't just a forgotten corner of history. It became one of the most unsettling unsolved disappearances ever reported. Over the decades, theories have tried to explain what happened, some rooted in science, others in legend. But none have been able to fully uncover the truth. So what really happened to the village by Angikuni Lake? Was it disease? Mass migration? Or something else entirely? Let's dig into what's known, what's claimed, and what might explain this vanishing town, piece by mysterious piece. Joe LaBelle's account is what first brought the story to public attention. As a trapper and explorer, LaBelle knew the region well. The village he arrived at normally housed a small community of Inuit families. But this time, there was no one to greet him. Homes were empty, belongings left behind, and food remained on stoves as if people had just stepped out. But they hadn't come back. LaBelle claimed he searched the area but found no sign of a struggle, no signs of illness, and most disturbingly, no tracks in the snow leading away from the village. The only bodies he found were the sled dogs, still tied up, starved to death, suggesting the people had left suddenly and had not returned even to care for the animals. Frightened and confused, LaBelle traveled to the nearest telegraph station and contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. An investigation began, but what they found only deepened the mystery. According to early newspaper reports, the RCMP confirmed that the village was deserted. In some homes, clothing had been left neatly folded. Weapons, vital for hunting in the region, were still present. Nothing valuable had been taken. Fires were still smoldering. And yet no people. Adding to the confusion, a strange sight was reported by other trappers in the area, glowing lights in the sky, which many later interpreted as a possible UFO connection. Though no solid evidence supported that idea, it added a strange layer to an already eerie situation. The RCMP made efforts to find the missing people, but no bodies were ever recovered, and no clear explanation ever surfaced. To understand the scale of this disappearance, it helps to know about the region. Angikuni Lake is remote, cold, and largely untouched. The Inuit communities that lived there were highly self-sufficient, skilled in hunting and survival, and familiar with the challenges of living in such a harsh environment. The people who lived near the lake would not have left lightly. They had deep roots in the land, and their lifestyle depended on stability and local knowledge. For an entire village to vanish, something very serious must have happened. Over time, several theories have been suggested, some more likely than others. Let's look at the most talked about ones and how well they hold up. One of the simplest explanations is that the village moved to another location, perhaps due to environmental reasons, scarcity of food, changes in wildlife migration, or weather conditions. But here's the issue: Inuit communities don't just leave behind essentials like rifles, clothing, and food. They also wouldn't abandon their dogs, important for transportation and survival, by tying them up and letting them starve. If it were a planned move, they would have left signs, taken what they needed, and definitely not left fires burning or food cooking. Another idea is that disease or starvation wiped out the village, and the people either died or were forced to flee in search of help. But again, no bodies were ever found, and all signs pointed to a sudden departure, not a slow decline. Also, Inuit communities were highly adapted to surviving harsh winters. The time of year, November, meant that they were likely well prepared with food and supplies. If disease had struck, there would have been physical evidence, such as signs of illness in the homes or in the dead dogs. Some have suggested that a natural disaster, such as a sudden storm, earthquake, or even a predator attack, could have scared the villagers into fleeing. But the geography of the region doesn't support this. There was no storm reported, no flood or avalanche, and no damage to the village itself. Also, again, no tracks in the snow leading away. If something had driven them away in panic, there would likely be visible signs, chaos, mess, footprints, or drag marks, but nothing like that was ever reported. Because of the glowing lights reported by other travelers, a few theories have veered into the supernatural or extraterrestrial. Some people believe the villagers were taken by spirits, aliens, or some unknown force. Of course, these ideas are more imaginative than realistic. There's no physical evidence of alien involvement, and the lights could easily have been auroras, which are common in northern Canada. While these theories may be interesting, they don't provide actual proof, and they rely more on fear and curiosity than on solid facts. Some researchers argue that the entire story is greatly exaggerated, or even a complete fabrication. They claim that Joe LaBelle's account was never fully verified and that newspapers at the time may have blown the story out of proportion to sell more copies. Later RCMP statements deny many of the details. Some even said the whole thing was a myth. This is where things get complicated. It's true that some parts of the story may have been added or altered as it spread over time. For example, early reports mentioned specific numbers of people missing, while later versions added eerie details like the dogs and glowing lights. These changes make it hard to separate fact from fiction. However, it's also true that some kind of abandonment or disappearance really did occur. A 1930 article by journalist Emmett E. Kelleher reported that the RCMP was investigating, and local trappers backed up some of LaBelle's story. The RCMP did respond, which means something triggered concern. While it's clear that many versions of the story have been dramatized, there are still real elements behind it. The village was there. People were living in it. And then they weren't. Some records exist to show an actual investigation took place. Even if the number of people missing or the glowing lights were exaggerated, the core mystery remains. Why would an entire community leave behind everything, including their dogs, with no warning or signs of struggle? That's not something easily explained, or faked. And about those footprints. One of the most repeated elements of the story is that no footprints were found leading away from the village. It's often presented as eerie, unexplainable proof that people simply vanished. But realistically, this doesn't hold up under scrutiny. November in northern Canada is a time of heavy snowfall and wind. If the villagers had left during a snowstorm, or even hours before new snowfall, their tracks would have quickly been erased by nature. Snow, especially fresh or drifting, can cover tracks in minutes. So the absence of footprints isn't necessarily a sign of something unnatural. It's likely a result of weather, not wonder. The story of the town that disappeared overnight is more than a spooky tale. It's a reflection of how fragile and confusing real-life mysteries can be. Whether the Angikuni Lake village was a victim of harsh weather, an emergency no one recorded, or something we still can't explain, the fact remains, it vanished, and no one really knows why. In today's world of constant surveillance, GPS, and digital records, it's hard to imagine something like this happening. But in 1930, in the remote cold north, one small village quietly slipped into history, leaving behind only questions. And sometimes, questions are more haunting than answers.